Sponsored by Bangkok Bank, the Sukhothai Residences, SIPA New Decade Innovation, and Magnolia's Ratcharamri Boulevard.
Good morning, ASEAN. Freshen up your world, your thought, and your idea with us every Monday to Friday from 7:30 to 8 a.m. I'm Nirasha Malisaklami.
And I'm Wina Jumbasit. It's Thursday, the 19th of September, and yesterday there was a real surprise, Kunyarasha, in the financial markets as the U.S. Federal Reserve has announced that it will not begin the tapering down of its quantitative easing just yet, as the Federal Reserve on Wednesday left its $85 billion a month stimulus program in place, surprising economists and markets expecting a reduction that would confirm a strengthening U.S. economy. Fed policymakers cut their growth forecast for this year and next and said they wanted to further gauge the impact of ongoing government spending cuts and a spike in interest rates in the past 4 months on the economy. Federal Chairman Ben Bernanke said that the Federal Open Market Committee, or the FOMC, could still begin reducing the $85 billion a month bond buying program aimed at holding long-term interest rates low this year, but only if the outlook for the economy strengthens. There is no fixed calendar, Bernanke told reporters in a news conference after a two-day FOMC policy meeting. Markets, which had anticipated the beginning of the end of the quantitative easing, or QE, bond buying program since May, reacted sharply. Stocks soared on the news of the Fed's continuing QE injections into the economy, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 rocketing up around 1% to new record closing highs. FOMC said it was holding back on reducing the QE program to await more evidence that progress will be sustained. Bernanke had signaled in May and June that FOMC would ratchet down the QE program from as early as this month, with the expectation of winding it up completely by mid-2014. For most analysts, the debate was only over how much the bond purchases would be cut, with the guesses from $5 billion a month to $25 billion a month. The prospects of the removal of that much liquidity from the economy had already pushed up interest rates, with average 30-year home mortgage rates jumping in 4 months from 3.32% to 4.48%.
And now let's shift our attention to the political situation in Thailand, as the importance of the House deliberations in the second reading of the 2 trillion baht borrowing bill for the development of transport infrastructure is reflected in the postponement of the mobile cabinet meeting scheduled in Lopburi province. The cabinet meeting was deferred so that the government could devote all its resources to defending the bills. While the government whip has set the debate for early today and tomorrow, the opposition say that the time frame would be impossible. The atmosphere of the debates might be similar to that of the joint meeting, considering constitutional amendment that took 12 days to finish deliberations of the Article 13 bills. The 2 trillion baht borrowing bills has 19 articles, while 143 MPs have submitted motions to alter the law draft. The proposed changes range from very small issues or sarcastic messages to serious issues like the measure to prevent corruption. MP Bunyat Suktin Thai proposed that the name of the bill be changed to the bill to authorize the Finance Ministry to borrow 2 trillion baht for the development of national transportation infrastructure in all aspects up to 50% of gross domestic products. However, at the same time, many Democrat MPs proposed an additional to the definition in Article 3 of the bill that the borrowing must be used according to the national strategies on transport infrastructure. It must be according to the national anti-corruption laws. Bunyat said that the bill should state that the authorities, according to this law, must maintain monetary and financial discipline. He also added that a clause in the bill saying the borrowed money must be used for sustainable development of the country in every aspect, while the implementation is transparent and according to good governance. The MP also proposed the roles of private organizations recruited to take part in the fight against corruption. They also proposed agreements by related organizations to work transparently and to declare information. They also require declarations of contract details, including procurement plans, scopes of work, name lists, and the cost bid by each contender, the winning contractors, as well as the contract details.
The Lao government has signed an agreement with Thailand for loans for two infrastructure projects, one on the road improvement and the other on water supplies. The agreement was drawn up between Laos Ministry of Finance and Thailand's neighboring country's Economic Development Cooperation Agency at a ceremony held in Vientiane yesterday. The water supply project will involve water infrastructure improvements in the provinces of Udom Sai, Sayaburi, Bokeo, Suvarnakhet, and Champasak at a cost of 310 million baht. The development of water supplies is viewed as a key priority to improving health outcomes in Laos and will make a considerable difference to the livelihoods of people living in rural areas. Meanwhile, the road construction component will involve the upgrading of a road between Kop and Siangpon districts in Sayaburi province, which links to Bokeo province at a cost of about 1 billion baht. This project is designed to improve the route between the Lao and Thai borders via Sayaburi and Bokeo provinces. It is in line with Lao government policy to improve the road network to neighboring countries and connect with the economic corridors of the Greater Mekong sub-region. The road upgrade will facilitate both local and cross-border movement, transportation, and trade, boosting the economy of the area. It is also expected to provide a significant boost to the tourism in Bokeo and Sayaburi.
And according to Philippines officials, Philippine forces yesterday secured most of the villages from the Muslim rebels as fighting up after more than a week of clashes in a southern Philippine port city. The fighting, in which 107 people have been killed, has highlighted lingering grievances in the Catholic majority country despite its growing economy and an agreement with the biggest Muslim rebel group that was meant to bring peace. The guerrillas who stormed into the city of Zamboanga on September 9th belong to a breakaway factions of the Moro National Liberations Front, or MNLF. They object to a deal aimed at ending 40 years of conflict signed last October with the main Muslim rebel group, the Moro Islamic Liberations Front, or MILF, and are trying to derail it. An army spokesperson said that troops have started to conduct clearing operations on the recovered villages in hopes of finding more trapped civilians and securing the area. Interior Secretary Ma Rosas told reporters that only 50 rebels remain as their operations to secure Zamboanga city continues. He said that Philippine forces have successfully contained the rebels and can only operate on a very limited area, and if something wrong were to happen outside, they are the ones who were either escaping or who tried to break the area of operations.
We'll take a look at the next special report on China's growth and its role in Southeast Asia. China's economic growth has slowed for the past 2 quarters, but the world's second largest economy is aiming for higher quality growth, according to an emerging market expert.
China's growth for the first quarter this year was 7.7%, and in the second quarter, or the April to June period, growth slipped to 7.5%. Its GDP growth target for the entire 2013 is 7.5%. This is a world of difference from the double-digit growth China used to boast in the past.
So we are in this period where China is downshifting to a structurally lower path of growth. For this year and for next year, we're looking at, on average, around about 7%. So we're really expecting that floor in terms of growth to be maintained. And sort of what is happening right now in the last sort of few quarters is really this process of China moving to slower growth, but ultimately higher quality growth.
China has recently promised to transform its economy through reforms and measures to tackle its environmental problems, such as air pollution, as the economic giant is reportedly the world's biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emission by volume. However, giving priority to the environment might have a toll on its growth.
What is changing is where the investment spending is taking place. So fixed asset investment, which was a very important part of growth in China previously, this is now changing. And so there's a greater focus on environmental projects, water projects, essentially to make China grow cleaner, greener, and this is simply going to mean that, of course, it's a very positive thing, but it also means slower growth. So the previous model, which was very sort of, purely export and fixed asset investment driven, was also essentially, more polluting.
The emerging markets economist said China recognized it had to move away from this model, a move which has resulted in a transitory period with slower growth. Additionally, Hover said China's growth currently comes from its strong consumers, as the country has about $1 trillion per year in retail sales. Domestic demand is strong and wages are rising. Meanwhile, China's role among its regional neighbors ahead of the ASEAN Economic Community will be important.
This is a region which is growing, and so Chinese investors or Chinese companies will be really excited about that and want to sort of gain access to this. So I think really more broadly speaking, it's going to be a much more integrated region than it was before, and China is playing a very big role in that.
He said he expected more investment across the borders and companies looking for opportunities in China and outside China, including Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Additionally, the emerging markets expert said China's role as a major commodity importer from the rest of Asia and as an exporter into final destinations, particularly in G3 economies, including the United States, Europe, and Japan, will not change anytime soon. Weena Jongprasit reports.
And coming up next after the break, we're going to continue our Tibetan journey with Kun Pasurang Deshak Puttarangsi.
Sponsored by Bangkok Bank, the Sukhothai Residences, SIPA New Decade Innovation, and Magnolia's Ratcharamri Boulevard.
Now let's continue our Tibetan journey, and for today we're going to have a look at the hidden lagoon at 4,700 altitude.
Pilgrims long for a visit on the roof of the world because it's the last mundane step to heaven. Namptso Lake is a hidden lagoon, the heavenly lake of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Although it is not the only scenic lake of Tibet, but the only accessible one. With 4,600 altitude, it is not the sole adventure, as visitors must also climb through the peak of 5,000 meters above the sea level in order to end up breathing the air around this exquisite lagoon.
It is another top spot of the roof of the world here in Tibet, the mysterious Namptso Lake, which is very well preserved in the National Park of Tibet, China. Well, back in Lhasa town where I stayed, it is already 3,600 meters above the sea level, but here it's over 4,000 meters above the sea level. As you can see behind me are the mountain ridges with snow-capped mountains, and the sun is very strong, but it's still very cold, and the breeze is very freezing. And of course, this place is very scenic. It's just magnificent.
Namptso Lake is located on the North Tibetan grassland, more than 200 kilometers away from Lhasa downtown. Rising 4,718 meters above the sea level, and covering an area of 1,920 square kilometers. The lake has 70 kilometers in length from east to west and 30 kilometers in width from south to north. Meanwhile, Lake Namptso is the second largest saltwater lake in China next to Qinghai Lake. It is also the highest saltwater lake in the world. The melted snow from Ngangkhendangla Mountain is the primary resource of the lake. The water is crystal clear blue. Clear and blue sky reflects on the surface of the lake in the distance, creating an integrated scenic vista. Namptso Lake is like a large precious mirror besetting on northern Tibet grassland. The founder of Tibetan Buddhism once studied Dharma beside the lake in the year of sheep in Tibetan calendar. Every 12 years, thousands of believers flock here and walk around the lake. So Namptso became a sacred lake in the mind of Tibetan. With luscious grass and sweet water, the grassland around the lake becomes a paradise for sheep and yaks. When roaming around Namptso Lake, herds of sheep and yaks come into sight. Here also is a natural habitat for rare water birds like swans, egrets, and sandbirds. Best time to visit Namptso Lake from June to September. In the late October, the snow cuts off the road there. In the March and April of the following year, Namptso Lake reopened to the public again. Patsurang Decha Puttarangsi reports.
And that's wraps up our Good Morning ASEAN edition for today. See you again, same time, same place, same channel.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Weena Jungprasit.
And I am Nirasha Malisak Lumi. สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ